there wasn't that much enthusiasm for it, so maybe they'll drop it next year.
The Board of Education study session at 5:03. All board members, with the exception of Rob Hammond, are here, and I think we invited MTA teachers to participate as well in this study session. It is regarding our LCAP budgeting, but they have not shown as of yet. So hopefully we will have some teachers give some input on things that are going to affect them directly. Right. With that, Kathy, you want to start us off?
Absolutely. We're going to actually start today with textbooks. This is where we get left off last time. We didn't get to it with our study session, but it actually dovetails nicely with our LCAP because this is our instructional core. And I think what I'll do is just pass it along to Dr. Kaiser, who will talk about instructional materials and then textbooks, and then move into LCAP.
Okay, all right, we're going to start tonight with our instructional materials timeline projection. And there are 4 items that we're going to discuss. The first is the history of the funding and the adoption timelines, then the components of the revised adoption guidelines, and then the Williams requirements, and then finally the roadmap of the projected textbook purchases. As we began to look at textbooks and what we have done historically, there were several factors that began to play, and some of it was the perceptions of new things coming into the district, the amount of money that we're spending on textbooks. It prompted some questions like, what have we historically funded textbooks? Where has the textbook money been? And so I have a little PowerPoint that has the same information that's on your materials outline. This has a few more details. First of all, the history and the funding and the adoption timelines. We've had 2 major funding sources: the Instructional Materials Fund, and historically, it's the state has given us between $350,000 to $450,000 a year. This money sunsetted in 2012-13. The state stopped sending it. We received it every single year prior to that. And what happened is the state said, this is now part of your base grant. So there are no more textbook funds that come to us earmarked. And then the second piece of money that has been used for textbook funding is the lottery, and we've used about $120,000 a year in lottery funds. The district receives about $220,000. And then during, go ahead.
That is not specifically earmarked for textbooks, though.
It is
That's
not.
That's the total of the lottery money,
Right.
right? Okay.
Okay.
Excuse me.
And so $320,000 per year of that instructional materials funding was swept during the budget crisis when funds were made available. And so as we're looking at textbooks, it's important to realize that when Connie projects the general fund, that we need to have about $400,000 to $500,000 a year that is in a set aside for textbooks. That, you know, that needs to be budgeted. That may look like it's loose funding, and at times, as I'll show you in terms of the timelines, it may look like it's being carried over, and you know, now we have $1 million, but I'll show you in the timeline where that goes into play. So our adoption cycle was very systematic until 2009. In every single year, every 2 years, there was a new adoption until 2009. And so if you're a social studies teacher, every 7 years you would receive a new textbook and go through the process of revamping your program according to the new standards or the new periods. For instance, we all can remember things like when the Vietnam War was added to the textbooks, when the Iraqi War was added to the textbooks, and teachers had to develop new lessons and units based on new history books. For an elementary school teacher, they are receiving a new adoption every 2 years. And so that's an avalanche of new material, isn't it? They have been on a hiatus since 2009. No new adoptions in terms of that mandatory because of the budget crisis. So it has resumed in 2014 with a new math textbook adoption, and now we're headed into a new ELA adoption now in 2017. We can expect to see those new adoptions coming along every couple of years now because we're back on the horse again. And so what are the components of the adoption guidelines? The development of Common Core and the new assessment tools and the new funding structure all play into what happens with textbooks. The Common Core created the necessity of having revamped textbooks, and then we're responding to new assessment tools, and then the funding was shifted from the materials funding to the LCFF or the general fund. The Williams requirements require that local education agencies are required to certify textbooks are current standards aligned, and every student has a textbook within 8 weeks of the start of school. And so in terms of, you know, having the option of, you know, saying, well, these books aren't used up yet, they're good enough, we are required to certify that ours are standards aligned and that they're current. We do have some flexibility in terms of supplementing some textbooks that we may have to create the standards alignment, and so there's some internal work that we can do as we move along.
So when you said that each student has to have a textbook, is that a physical textbook, electronic textbook? What happens if we go to tablets?
It can be, we can certify given electronic material or concrete material.
Okay, does that also include like handouts? So if we didn't have a textbook for a class and we just had worksheets, disposable, does that meet the requirement?
No, it doesn't, because with worksheets, you're not going to have the full Monty of what the standards are asking you to do. Okay, so what I'd like you to take a look at.
Let me go back and ask for a clarification, President Wong. Are you asking
I'm not
whether
suggesting
or not
anything, I'm trying to get a definition of what a textbook is.
there are textbooks that we have that are consumable?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that would qualify as, and perhaps be identified as a worksheet, but, and just because it is a consumable one and it would have to be replenished on a yearly basis.
Okay, and the textbooks, I'm sorry, the textbooks need to be in line with,
They need to be aligned to the standards.
and who certifies that a book is in line with the standards?
We go through a process internally here, and we work with the county, the Los Angeles County Office of Education.
So the county is then the person who says, yes, this qualifies, or no, it does not qualify.
When they come and do the Williams visit, they are looking to make sure that those materials are aligned to the standards.
So as standards continuously change, how do we determine whether we are up to speed?
Standards haven't changed. They changed recently in 2012. They hadn't changed since 2002. 1997. Yeah. We were living with the old standards for very many years. So with the onset of the Common Core, our standards haven't changed since they were adopted by the state.
And all of our textbooks today meet the 2012 standard.
Yes, they do.
Current.
Yes, they do.
And to clarify, the Common Core state standards, or California state standards as they are now, are in English language arts and math. And there is work being done in science and social science, but those have not yet been
No.
finalized.
So in response to your question about standards are changing, yes, they are, in different subjects, they're continuing to be written and updated. We have the next generation science standards in science. The materials are not yet adoptable. We have a new framework in social science. The materials are not yet adoptable. The materials are just now being given to the State Department of Education for their approval. And so those will be on the adoption cycle coming up.
So what is our threshold to make the determination that we need a new textbook?
When the textbooks come out, the state gives us a guideline with a calendar, which we're going to go over next. And so when it comes up on the calendar, that's when the state has created a list of adoptable materials, and at that point, we have the option of going open source or taking an adoption from a major publisher or minor publisher, or something that's on the list. If we go open source or do something that is not on the list, then we have to go through a certification process with the county.
If the standards haven't changed, why would we?
The standards, right, we don't need new textbooks if the standards don't change. They did change in math and language arts, so we have new textbooks for those two subjects. They have changed for social studies and science, and those are just now in the process of being developed by the State Department.
So that's after the 2012 date?
Yes,
So would that be-
the 2012 was math and language arts.
Okay.
Okay, so on the next,
The comment was a consumable workbook. We have to buy it every year. And we reduce that. I mean, would that be a reproducible, or is that something that has to be actually purchased from a vendor?
It could be.
The second question is in Williams requirements, say we have to have a textbook for each student in each subject, but is it only in math, English, science, and geography that Williams covers, or does Williams cover every class they're taking?
it's every class that's in our master schedule. And any.
Does the county have to approve, say, the art textbooks?
There are master lists on the UC approvals for
every
the high school for every subject, and when those course descriptions are sent in for the approval, the high school courses, there's a textbook listed. We are required to have that textbook in the hands of every student.
What about elementary?
In elementary, whatever we have on our textbook list that has been approved by our board, we need to have in the hands of every student. Okay. The next page is attachment A. It shows you the lottery projections for the next few years, just to give you the idea of what we're projected to have in the next 5 years. And the projection has been reduced by 2% per year based on declining enrollment. The next page in your packet is the schedule that Brian was, that answers a question that Brian had about how this works. This gives us the years 2013 through 2025, and it shows you math, language arts, history, science, health, world language, visual and performing arts, and physical education. And the F that you see in the boxes shows when the framework is developed and approved by the state board. The A shows you when the instructional materials adoption can begin. In looking at this list, you'll see history, social science in the year 2017 for the adoption. Right now, where the state is with the adoption for history, social studies, they are just now considering what text they're going to have on the state adopted list, and they don't expect to have that approved by the State Board of Education until August this year, and so that truly will not be adoptable by districts until 2018-19. So this schedule as it stands, and this is the most current schedule from the California Department of Ed, it will be pushed out a little bit because they're not ready with some of the work that they need to do. And that's to our advantage because we don't need to adopt those right away then.
Right. So if I'm looking at this chart,
Mm-hmm.
and let's just pick the extremes because they're the easiest. So if you look at the visual and performing arts, which has an adoption of 2022 and nothing before that, that means for those particular classes, we would not be changing any of the textbooks until that point in time. Is that correct?
The only time that we change the textbook is if something begins to appear to be obsolete or not meeting like the standards for an AP class. If AP changes the test or updates their test, then that would trigger some work in terms of buying a newer edition, which I believe we did last year with the art history book.
But it wouldn't be mandatory.
No, but it becomes mandatory, not aligned to this, but it becomes mandatory aligned to getting the College Board AP credit for that class.
But then the problem we run into is if we bought, let's just stick with the visual performing thing because it's so far away, a new textbook in say 19, and then that particular book did not align with whatever they needed to do, that you wouldn't go out and buy yet another textbook.
That's correct.
You indicated that if the standards are adopted, say, what we're talking about in 21, then the first year of adoption would be 22.
Right.
So would that mean, in order to meet Williams, we would have to have all these new textbooks in 22, or do we have a period of time after adoption that we have to implement it?
With the advent of the hiatus that we had with our textbooks, that period of time when that adoption cycle was on vacation, that the stringency of these adoption timelines changed. And in the most recent history of the last 20 years, we haven't had a situation where like a history social science book wasn't adoptable because they weren't ready. And we're having that now. So it's my guess that all of these are going to be pushed out because of the fact that they're not ready this year with the history social studies. And so you can't pile history, social studies, and science in the exact same year. So if you push those out, you're going to be pushing these out a little bit. And so in our projection that we're making in terms of what we need to look at financially, we're estimating that these dates are going to be soft dates and pushed out 1 to 2 years. The ones,
But back to my question.
There is a window. It does not, it's not a hard window when we.
not anymore. Yeah.
So is the window 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years?
We have deliberately not been the first out of the gate to adopt because we just don't believe that the first materials out are necessarily the best. And for that reason, going to our English language arts adoption.
Why don't we use that as the best
Okay.
example?
And I think English and math are the easiest to speak to because they touch every student. With the language arts adoption, it was a very stringent process. And we thought at one point that we might be able to do open source materials and do something where we could knit something together and it would, save the district a lot of money. And when we went to the county and we went to the meeting where they explained what we have to produce for Williams, we don't have the capacity in our district to write a full curriculum for every grade level, and that's what it required. It required that a group of educators sit down and create a curriculum map for every single grade level that would actually be knitting the curriculum together, and it has to be certified. And so when we looked at that, we just don't have the capacity. We came back and we started the adoption process. We were not the first we were not in the group of the first districts to adopt the ELA material, but by next year, Williams will be expecting to have the new materials in everybody's hands. And we were told that at the county. So they keep us apprised of that timeline as we march along and march through.
That timeline is set by the county. And I think what I hear you saying is the English language arts adoption would have started in 15, and county is gonna say, and because of all the issues you just mentioned,
We're
that
starting
by the
in
end of 18, would have 100% of the students covered with the new material.
by the beginning of the fall of 17.
Okay.
So can you explain how that correlates to the footnote at the bottom of the textbook overview page?
Yes, that's where we're going next.
That applies to
Nice
that.
segue. Chris is pushing us along. So
We'll come back because this is K-8, so where's 9, 12?
I didn't pull it off. It follows the exact same tune. It marches the same way.
It's the same pattern, but
It's the same
not
pattern.
It's not the same year. So
It is the same
it's
years.
the same year.
Mhm.
So that could, at the top say, okay, 12.
Mhm.
Okay, so when we have to do a new adoption for science, let's say, and it's K-12, clearly we have different science books throughout the entire K-12. So we have to replace all of the science books, K-12.
Correct.
So if we postpone adoption by 1 year, basically, that's only a 1 year savings because everything else has to be kicked. But at some point, you gotta adopt. Basically, 1 per year.
But
Right.
Sue's footnote at the bottom of the page
yeah,
says we
well,
traditionally adopt in the winter, spring of year 2.
Mhm.
It's the second year, so
Right.
that's
we-
what I mean. This
yeah.
footnote's gonna go to answer part of that.
I think
And-
we're gonna circle back up.
If it started in the first year of adoption, and we said, well, we wanna save some money, so we're gonna push that to the second year. That only is 1 year money for all the textbooks.
I understand,
Mm-hmm.
but
But before we move on, I
that's
just
not
wanna
answering the timeline
get this
question.
one page before we go on to the next one. So what I heard was that the timeframe for the adoption is, although they may indicate a start date, it is roughly 2 years, 2-year window that we have for any particular topic that we should be doing.
Correct. Mhm.
And so my question is, what happens if you don't meet the deadline?
Then you don't certify with Williams,
And
and they can fine us.
who's that?
The state of California.
The state of California could fine us.
Mhm.
And how is that fine?
I don't know. The county has never had a school district in the entire county since Williams started that they haven't certified. Everybody has met their
No precedent.
and when Williams comes, their interest is to make sure that they're abiding by, when the county comes to certify, their interest is to make sure that we are complying, and it's certainly our interest. We don't want to wiggle out of our obligation to have textbooks for children.
I understand.
And-
I just want to know what the ramifications
Yeah.
are if we're painted into a box and we have to make judgments.
Yeah, they've never had a situation. Anyway, the next sheet is our textbook overview with a timeline that shows you in 2015, January 2015, was the state timeline to adopt the ELA pieces, and then it'll come up again in 2023. Our timeline for adopting is 2015, 16 to 2016, 17, and we went through the adoption process this year with new books in the hands of children in the fall, and that is K-12. The cost of this adoption, K-12, is $1,337,000. And this goes for an 8-year period, so all of the consumables will be replaced as part of this fee every single year. The teachers and the children will get the new load of consumables. It also comes with all of the digital components.
So this is K-12,
Yes, it is.
one subject, K-12, $1.3 million.
And ELA is our most expensive adoption that we make.
The 1.3 is paid out in 15, 16, and 17, or is part of that because it's consumable stretched out till 2023?
We pay it out now in 16, 17, but
So the costs are all front-loaded.
it's all front-loaded. And then we don't pay, and we will be complete.
And it is complete as of now,
We're getting the materials, they're being shipped right now.
as far as the expense goes.
It's
Has the
complete.
bill been-
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Okay, and then we look at math and I do want to go back, actually, no. In math, you'll see that we adopted our math in 2014, 15, and we have these annual consumable prices with our supplemental and we have supplemental for integrated 1, 2, and 3. And then we adopted our pre-calculus through AP statistics, and our cost for math, which was paid at the end of 2016, is $486,624.
That does not include any more consumable.
The annual consumables are our SWAN math, and it's detailed on the next sheet, so we'll go there in a minute.
What's the 486? That's
It's
money
for
that was
the,
spent last year?
yes, on math.
But then 156 of that has to be spent annually?
Yes, for the SWAN math materials, which are consumable every year. For
Okay,
it's
so
for
the
elementary.
486 is a combination of 1 year of annual consumables and 8 years of other textbook materials.
Right.
So the total cost over that year, 8 years, is gonna be more like $1,300,000.
Mhm. And when we go to the detail
About the same
sheet,
as math, then.
yeah, well, yes, when we go to the detail sheet, I'll show you what we've done with that. Okay, and then science is going to come around in 2019-20. Is the year that we will look at adopting, and you'll see that the dates right now that we're guesstimating are 2018-19 to 2019-20. We will like to be in the second wave, not the first wave of making the adoption. And these are the subjects that we will be adopting: life, biology, chemistry, physics, AP biology, AP chemistry, and AP physics. And with our life, biology, chemistry, and physics, we have to look at, in our middle school and high school, making a decision about going integrated versus core subjects like we did with math. And we are not in a position yet to create a full educated analysis of that. We want our teachers to have some more time with the science standards. Our high school and middle school teachers have had 2 years looking at next generation science standards. They're very complex, and we want to really rely on some think tanks and a careful analysis before we make such a decision that could, have either a very positive or a very negative impact on our students. The people that are working on the next generation science standards are looking at the middle school would not be as impacted as the high school would be in terms of going integrated. So we need to really take our time and do a careful analysis. We're not at a point of making a decision yet. So that decision needs to be made before we decide on what textbook path we're going to take, or even what we will pilot.
How much input do the teachers on the choice of not only the textbooks, but on the decision whether to integrate?
It will be exactly the same process that we used with math, where every single teacher in the middle school and high school that teaches those subjects will have input. And with math, we worked toward a consensus to where we got 100% consensus at the high school before we moved into integrated. We will expect to do the same thing with the science. That we will take our time educating the teachers and weighing out the pros and cons and truly getting a consensus of every teacher. And if you recall, when we made that decision here in this boardroom, we had every teacher present when we made that decision regarding math.
Okay.
Okay?
612.
That was 612. Okay, and then history, social science.
There's no consumables for the science category?
There may be consumables, they'll be bundled into these costs, and there'll be consumables over an 8-year period. It's the way that they work.
So these costs are all inclusive?
Those are static, yeah. And then history, social science is a pretty straightforward adoption. It'll most likely be 2018-19, and the cost of that will be run $494,000. These numbers, of course, can fluctuate. We've done our best to estimate based on previous adoptions and then looking at what the rising costs have been to come up with a solid estimate. I did check with several publishers, and they said, well, we don't have any pricing yet because we haven't been approved by the state board yet. So these are numbers that we've looked at projecting from our last adoptions. Okay? Okay, the next page is the one that I'm just so proud of. What we've prepared for you that is going to be a guiding light for us is a 10-year projection on our adoptions. And so you can see 2016-17 all the way to 2025-26, what the adoptions are, what is being purchased, what the expenditure is, and then what the funding source is. And so Ed had a question about the consumables for K-5 math. You see here that we have SWAN math, and we have that projected out for several years. We're able, because it comes as a professional development package, to purchase those materials, the copying of that material, out of our supplemental and concentration money. So it's not a general fund expense. The ELA adoption, we were able to split fund the ELA adoption out of supplemental and concentration and general fund because half of the adoptable materials are intervention materials. And so being in a line and being true to the mission and the vision for those supplemental and concentration funds, serving our 3 priority populations, those are the students that we need to intervene with. And so we have pulled the money from those funds. Then we have our math and Spanish being pulled from lottery. So this gives you a map of what the funding sources are over the next 10 years to the best of our ability to project this out so that we could really analyze realistically the impact to the general fund.
So you have Spanish language textbooks on there, but we don't anticipate any other foreign language textbooks being needed?
We may,
French.
we may need to have those are generally, those little singletons are pulled out of lottery, and there's enough lottery money to, in that half that's generally given to textbooks, for that lottery money to cover that. Lottery also usually covers the AP textbooks also.
But in our listing of textbook overviews and timelines, would not every textbook be listed for that reason?
We listed only the majors, and if you'd like us to come back with even a greater detail after doing the majors, we certainly could put in the minors.
Well, every textbook has to be certified, correct?
Right.
I just don't understand why every textbook, or every category at least, wouldn't be listed. I know it's not individually broken down textbook-wise, but why wouldn't we need to list every category?
Yeah, we
I
could come
understand
back,
it's not
we
a
could
lot of
come back
money
and put the minors in. We could come back. Would you like that in your Friday packet?
Please,
Okay.
please.
You know,
Okay.
and let's include it as a, we may wanna also break it up as a, in terms of category as well, because.
That's what I mean
like
by
early
category.
college, for
AP
example, will
AP.
have
That one,
dual immersion with
Yep.
Mandarin that you just mentioned,
and replacement cost.
and I think that's also.
I mean, there will be some
something that-
costs. I don't know how much that is. I mean, you say it's the minor, but what's minor? What's the
Right.
threshold for
Mhm.
minor?
And these costs that we're looking at here don't include textbooks that are lost, damaged, stolen, or do they? They don't, right?
The ones that are
So
lost,
every year
damaged,
we-
and stolen, we generally have the families give us money to replace them.
So we incur no cost for maintenance of these books through the year.
But there is always, there are
Do you know what an annual budget is historically, when we expend in the general fund or others for the replacement and repair of existing textbooks for K-12?
We,
Got a ballpark
I
figure?
don't think we need a lot of detail, it's just, what's
This is
our
just a
average
lump
annual
sum.
expenditure? How much
Is it $400,000? Is it $100,000? Is it?
Because the textbook, we have a regular replace missing textbook, so that's in general fund. And then what our practice is because the district have two set of lottery money. One is specific for textbook, we cannot use for other purposes else. So we normally use this part of money first to do the textbook. And-
No, I understand that. I'm asking how much money
How
does
much?
the district spend?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Replacement and repair.
we
of
will see if
textbooks
we could get that
and-
number.
Yeah,
Mhm.
we're going to.
And just on a side note, in these minors of interest is that the early college textbooks, we were able to purchase all of our early college textbooks with the CTE grant that we received as part of that consortium.
But, and so the funding sources we'll add that as a funding source.
Yes. And, this work, having a 10-year map of expenditures, this was just amazing. And I think that it's going to serve us very well having a 10-year map.
I think it will, especially as we go out budgeting, we can make sure that it is included on all of our forecasts. And, the thing that I'm not really getting, so maybe you're gonna have to reconcile this, is my understanding is they got rid of our annual grant, included it in our LCAP distribution, but I don't see a single line item on our LCAP budget for books.
No, they did not put it in the LCAP. It's in the general fund allocation, the LCFF, not the supplemental and concentration. So what they did is they took away our textbook money, and then they said you could just buy your own textbooks now out of your general fund.
A gift to you.
And here's one more gift for you guys.
And I think that that's a really important thing to see, because as we're moving forward, it's about $400,000 a year, between 400 and 500, that we have to set aside to make sure that we have the required textbooks in the hands of our children.
It's $500,000 every year we have to plan for.
What puts the onus on us? They're not giving us the money for it, and it's in there. You guys are responsible.
It's $500,000 we have to take from somewhere else because they took it away.
And to be honest with you, I prefer they give us all the money instead of giving us little pots like they used to. But it is a major factor when you go.
And that's why Connie pesters Sue about, how much do you need for textbook next year and the following? I'm putting in my first enrollment.
Connie pestering Sue.
And
I'm
now,
sorry.
now I have 10 years out.
I'm sorry, let me rephrase that.
Next time, could you video that?
That's exactly what it looks
We have
like.
a lot of blood in the room.
It's always Sister Sue. Are we ready to move on to transition to LCAP?
Is there any other questions on the budgeting as far as allocations of funds and when they're expected to be dispersed?
No questions. A few comments that aren't allowed on television, but
Well, you know, another comment that's not a money comment is you can see the pressure that is going to be applied in terms of the feeling of a bunch of new programs being placed on our elementary teachers specifically, because they're going to be looking at new adoption after new adoption after new adoption, and with these new adoptions come training.
is it guaranteed that every subject will get a new adoption, or will some continue from previous?
They will
textbooks?
all get new
They will all
adoptions.
for
We
sure.
haven't had new textbooks in so long. The other thing that happens with textbooks, an example is our high school textbooks for English had not been replaced since 2002. And we got to the place where we were trying to buy them from the publisher. The publisher said, we don't publish them anymore.
Ours are
So we
falling
were
apart.
buying them from Amazon.com, used books from different agencies. Then we couldn't get them from different agencies when we were doing replacements. And so the problem comes then that we can't certify because we no longer have a book for every student. So then we can't certify our Williams. And so, yes, the cycle is back. The hiatus is over.
And hopefully the lifespan of the textbooks lasts, along with the publisher keeping them in print for the time period before we have to adopt again, or we run into the problem like
Right.
you just said. I mean, you have to be able to purchase replacement textbooks when they fall apart.
Trying to find the silver lining and everything. At least this is one thing that's fairly foreseeable and consistent, that we can plan out your budget. Everything else is.
Well, the big problem we have is, and we ran into this year around, was trying to forecast what the cost of a new subject is going to be when we have no benchmark, when we have nothing to peg it against. And our numbers can be way off, because we don't know, which is a huge concern. So on the lottery funds, this is the projection of what our lottery funds are going to be, correct?
Yes.
So when you total up per year your lottery expenses, is this, how are we matching?
There's carryover. And that's, so when you're looking at that, are you looking at this sheet?
Well, this is the only sheet that I know of, right? So this sheet is the only sheet that is indicating the lottery funds. Is that accurate?
For textbooks.
The textbooks.
And-
So if you look at 16-17,
Mm-hmm.
right, it's about 25,000, give or take,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we have 235,000. So the carryover goes to what?
It stays in the business office, and Connie uses it for lottery expenditures out of the business office.
Okay, so for lottery expenditures, there's a list of things that can and cannot be used, or can it be just put into the general fund if we so choose?
No, on the 10-year spreadsheet, should basically specifically say that what kind of adoption we needed. Out of a lottery textbook, we purchased another replacement textbook also. So which means that the lottery money listed in 1617 only part of $235,000.
Right. So what's the other part?
The other
That's my
part,
question.
the other part is all instructional material. And
Instructional
material,
material.
yes.
And how is that listed differently than textbooks? What's the defining factor?
It's things from the warehouse, pencils, paper, things that are ordered for schools. The other thing that Chris was asking about, the minors, if like an AP textbook has to be replaced in 2018-19, let's say, we're spending $21,000 that year in lottery money, so we'll have some textbook money that we've been holding because we hold about $120,000 a year for textbooks that we've been holding that we can spend then on the minors. So the minors generally come out of the leftover lottery, and that's it.
What's the time frame for carrying over that lottery? Can we
There's
just
a-
carry it forever?
Yeah, there's no limit for carryover, time limitation to carryover. The common practice is the district normally encourage you to spend a lot of money first if as needed, because this is most restricted funding. You can only purchase for textbook or instruction material.
We can.
We will give you the
future
breakdown. Yeah.
Breakdown of
Yes.
the lottery funds.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't sound like it'd be difficult, but that's what we can spend the lottery.
Yeah.
What percentage of any of this material that we're talking about will be digital,
They all come with a digital component, and we won't know that until we get further down the line in years to see what our device are. We would need to be one-to-one if we're going solely digital, where students are taking the machines home, and we don't know at what point we're going to cross over the threshold and be there.
That's why I'm wondering where we're at now.
Yeah,
Don't expect the cost to be much different, though.
I
no.
don't expect the cost to be much different, but the delivery is much different.
No, I agree.
And the lifespan is much
I'm
different.
wondering where we're at in that timeframe.
Most
Because I
digital-
don't think we're to the point that we're at that threshold where we have to go one-to-one, but I don't know where we're at on that timeframe, on that timeline.
The issue with digital is typically everything has a license, which is about
Yes,
a
it
year.
does.
Well, that's what you pay for.
Right?
You pay for the
So-
license.
So for example, the question was on English, you have two separate line items for 1 year cost of digital components. So are you saying that after this 1 year, we are not going to use those products anymore? Because that's a huge, that's over $200,000.
You're talking about because of the lifespan of the license? On the
It says
digital
1
license?
year,
Right,
right?
but it's been my experience with digital textbooks that it's a one-time license that does not have a time limit on it.
Yeah, I believe that we own these. I will check on that because I believe that we own
That, at the
these.
college level anyway, you buy the license and you now can use that textbook into perpetuity if it's available.
I know that's historically how things go, but.
I will
We need to
check
confirm-
on
We need to
it.
confirm that.
Because it says 1 year.
Check
I'm
on
not
it.
disagreeing with you, it does say that there, but we need to confirm that.
I will
Because
confirm it.
licenses typically are perpetual, they're not just 1 year. There's no time limit. It's a per use. Once you use it, then no one else can use it. But there's no timeline.
And some of our licenses do roll from what we own the license, and then when I'm done with it, then it can go to Connie. You know, after I'm done with third grade, then she can use it
Because
in
it's not
third grade.
it's not a per student license, it's a per district
It's a per
license.
district, it's just it's a number. But I'll check on that because it does say that here, and I don't recall hearing that from the publisher.
All right, because that is a incredible amount of money.
That would be an incredibly unfair thing to do to a district.
Fair.
Publishers want their money, but a license is just like a hard textbook.
Well, it doesn't
Should-
say license.
I understand.
I use the word license. This just says digital components. I'm not really sure what that meant.
It could be workbooks, digital workbooks.
It's actually everything that's in the thousands of pages of materials that a student has for a year in English language arts. It's everything digitally.
So it is the
It's
textbook.
It's a beautiful,
It's the textbook, the
it's a
workbook,
beautiful piece.
Supplementals.
While we're on this, and Charles, you're sitting here, might as well put you to work. Well said. Are there any additional expenses that you're aware of that aren't covered in these these all-encompassing topics that excluding hardware, because we know hardware is only one, right? Whether we're gonna get tablets for everybody or not, that's a whole different discussion. So is there anything else that you have a concern about?
Well, a lot of it comes down to, at least from IT's perspective, the device, making sure that hopefully we're sticking down to as very few types of devices as possible. So that way we can manage it efficiently, and having a good system to be able to manage it, to be able to roll it out efficiently and not have to hit it one by one. And
So that brings up a question too, if you're going digital, not that we're going all digital, but when you go digital textbooks and operating systems update, do those textbooks still work on newer operating systems? We haven't experienced that yet, probably.
correct.
So that, we don't know if
Yeah.
if they're backwards compatible.
Do you review when we have an electronic component, what those components are, how they fit with our existing system and our projected system for the next 5 years or 8 years in this case?
What I do look at is just the system's requirement. So whenever there's a digital component, if I'm able to get a hold of the system requirements, most of the time it meets what we already have.
But that's for today.
For today.
7 years
Right.
down the road, we have new operating
We know-
systems.
We know that each one is going to be for approximately 7 years.
7 or 8 years. Yeah.
Depending on the subject. Have a plan going forward for 5 years, give or take. We'll say 5 years. And I want to make sure that whatever we're bringing is going to fit 5 years from now. I don't want to spend $100,000 only to find out we're going to spend another $300,000 to support it,
And only the publisher would be able to answer that at this time, in our case.
which means
That's the question Charles has to
me
ask.
asking questions.
We will make the best decisions we have with the information we have, and that is absolutely our position.
I understand.
But there's the Educational Services Department and the Technology Department are communicating to make sure, and the materials before they were adopted were, tried out by teachers to see what works and what
We
doesn't.
that-
have no question about what you're doing and how you're picking what you're picking. I'm asking questions,
That's good.
and then you can tell me and confirm that you're doing it, but 3 years from now, I don't want to be able to say, we had this conversation about.
And I will say at that point, we made the best decisions we had.
We'll
We
see.
could with
Well,
the
We'll
because,
see.
information we
because
had.
down the road, one of the biggest financial concerns would be if we went to one-to-one devices and we went all digital textbooks, 5 years into it, the operating system updates and they're not backward compatible, we're super in trouble.
Okay.
Hey,
perfect.
Charles, question. Based on the dialogue we had when the MTA group was here and your needs, and that wonderful luncheon that I had with you and Dr. Kaiser and the new coaches, you don't see, back to Brian's question, you don't see any pending cost involved?
Well, we're always gonna,
Transition?
the wireless system I'm planning for, it's a wireless system where I don't have to do rip and replace. meaning, because that's one of the biggest costs when you have to rip out the whole thing and replace. This wireless system will allow me to upgrade sections as needed. So let's say at the high school, if for whatever reason we're seeing a lot more video content from the social science, but not necessarily math, now I only have to upgrade the social science wing, not necessarily the math. Versus the current system, you kind of have to rip out the whole system at a site base. So that's taken that in consideration as well. A lot of it has to do with just monitoring. Once this is in place, I anticipate we're going to be about 20% utilization, like network-wise. So we have a lot to grow on, and I can only answer that when we look at what the traffic is 3 to 4 years. But the key here for me is to keep an eye on it and to let folks know, hey, we're getting 60%, 70%. Then we can start figuring out what the plan is for upgrading.
I appreciate your discussion when we talked about that, about building that flexibility in. It wasn't that long ago, we thought smart boards were, wow, this is gonna be a great thing, gonna be great. Shoot, 2 years later, they were obsolete. Technology's flying so fast. I don't know how, flexibility is the only way I can see that we're gonna stay ahead of that at all. Because who knows what the technology is gonna be like 2 years, 5 years.
Going back to the license thing and the compatibility real quick, is a license for a digital textbook a downloadable product, or is it something that exists on the publisher's server that we access via the license?
From what I remember, what I've seen, it's been I think it's a downloadable product, but I have to
Okay.
double check and get
That
back
would
to you.
that would speak to the inability to be backward compatible. But if it's a digital copy that exists on the publisher's server, then it will always be compatible no matter how we upgrade our operating system, because they would have to upgrade for people to access their server.
The HMH digital content is web-based.
Okay.
Yeah, some people have been
So
changing that as well.
that would speak to compatibility. That would be better. Okay.
Perfect. Are we good with the number portions of the books? Cool, moving on.
Are we gonna have time? It's time for closed session.
I have another staple thing from,
I know, we have this.
all right, Dot, lead the way. What's next?
We can look at this for maybe Amy, how quickly do you think you can go through the information that we have here? I'd like to spend some time on it because there's good information.
And that's only one part of the equation. The other part is how many questions the four of us are going to ask
We don't ask questions.
You know,
and how long that will
I
take.
really thought textbooks was gonna take 15 minutes.
Yeah, that never happens in our world. It never happens in our world.
I thought we were gonna hear 3:30 to 4. That's why I was surprised when I saw
I
5.
We haven't even discussed the page.
The page.
The
You know,
page.
what I'm gonna suggest is that we go to closed session. There are some things that we probably need to discuss before the meeting begins.
When can we discuss LCAP?
We can, if you don't mind, recess.
This portion, well, you know what?
Can we do
For
that
this-
after the
This
meeting?
portion, and I haven't seen it, so I don't know.
Everybody here till after the meeting?
But this isn't necessarily a budget issue, right? This is more of an
That's the
overview.
foundation that will
Right.
lead to hopefully answering some questions about, and give some clarifications about some of the changes from last year's budget to this year's budget.
There'll be some questions.
There's
But
definitely.
isn't this basically driven by our LCAP plan itself?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
And so when the board approves that plan, this is it.
There are components, there are components of
that.
that plan which I have issue and would like to discuss, and that will go into a sort of a long discussion.
And as that's reviewed every year, we have 2 members of the board that are on the committee that work on.
Who's on the committee at this point?
Me and Rob,
Chris and Rob.
which I
And
have.
if the person
which-
on the committee has the questions, then
We
that's,
need to talk about it.
all right.
Just a visitor.
I think that,
I was in the
Terrence was there.
if I'm not mistaken, the reason we were bringing this up now was we need to be approving this and, within, right?
So we could do this the
60
next,
days.
we could do this the next meeting,
Um,
with apologies to
okay.
Amy.
Well, you know,
No worries.
the reason I'm leaning towards pushing it back is because Rob's not here and he's
Right.
been on the committee.
Right.
So
I agree
if
with
Chris
that.
has got questions, then Rob might have questions as well. So instead of making you go back and forth, it might be better if we do this next meeting. And honestly, I don't know that we need a study session for this. I think we can put
This
this
is,
as a presentation.
right, this is just to give you an idea of why. This is the why did this change?
Yeah.
How is this, what is this responding
And
to?
perhaps what we can do, I think what we can do is if Chris has some questions, maybe Amy, Rob, and Chris
Mhm.
and Sue can get together. We can figure out some
Ahead
of
of
those
time.
in advance so that we can just incorporate this in our actual meeting on the 14th. Does that
I
make
would
sense?
prefer to have this in our regular meeting,
Okay.
since I'm not seeing this as a study session. Rob can get your questions out, and hopefully she can prepare our time.
Then the four of us just need to have a meeting together then. That would be the best way, instead of us trying to submit questions and get answers.
Yeah.
I agree, I want everybody to hear that. So hopefully then
I agree.
have the questions, cut out, you know, you feel.
We'd feel gypped.
Don't worry, your time will come. Fear not.
I'm just betting that.
You know what?
Nope.
But this is, I do suggest you take this with you so that, one of the nice things that Amy has done is not only identified 16, 17, 18 budget, but you can see some of the bigger changes right next to it.
All right, what else we have scheduled for this?
But
That was it for this. It was just a closed session.
All right,
I
so what,
think staff did a great job preparing.
So do you need this again? Okay.
was very thorough. Thank you very much. Helps us with our bigger picture of all phases of our budget, not just this year, but ongoing. And this is good. This is really good.
Speechless.
So perfect. All right, I'm gonna adjourn the board study session at 6:03 and the open session at 6:03. Public comments, anyone? Anyone? Hearing none?
Speak now or forever hold your peace.
We will go to closed session. Thank you, guys.